My daughter attends the University of Western Florida, and I had just finished getting her settled in her dorm room, stocked up on groceries and other essentials. I left in the late morning and headed back home, which is east of Pensacola, some 3+ hours. All through the first hour or so, there were tremendous rain bands like we are used to here in Florida. As I was traveling on Interstate 10, the trailer trucks would put me up a literal fog of water spray, so I wasn't going more than 50 miles an hour. As I got out of the last rain band, the sky got brighter and brighter to the point where I could get back up to 70 miles an hour. I was still following a car at about 10 car lengths. I checked the rear view and no traffic behind, and I remember looking around the car ahead and nothing for some distance. I was just about ready to pass the white car when he put on his brakes and I closed distance to him fairly quickly. I braked, also not knowing what was ahead of him. Maybe a truck tire carcass, and he could swerve into my lane as I pass him. Even though I am driving a pickup truck, I ride a motorcycle and sort of drive like I ride, very defensively. As I slowed, I noticed some movement off the road. We were both in the right lane. On the other side of the guardrail, something caught my eye. We had just come over either a swampy area or a small creek, so there was a guardrail over that area. Still, there was a gully between the guardrail and the tree line, maybe 20 feet deep. Almost instantly, I thought bear, but wrong color. Our bear here are jet black, and if they stand, you have the rare chance to see that. They aren't very tall. And the next thought, I thought it was a man in a ghillie suit, but wrong again. This was not material, it was hair. Matted down, wet hair. And the height, maybe 8 feet. It was huge. So, as I saw it, by this time, I was almost stopped. The car had directly abeam of the creature and stopped, or very slow. What I saw was a living creature. Everything articulated perfectly. Head, arms, and legs. I had a profile to back view of it, saw its muscles in the upper back. The color wasn't exactly uniform, but varied between shades of chocolate brown. The head looked rounded. I couldn't see ears or a neck, but it definitely had a head, and looked down before stepping into the gully. At that time, I saw arms that moved, but really saw the separate legs, and saw what was matted hair stuck together from the leg. It stepped down, rounded the gully, and out the other side to go into the tree line. Its motion was very smooth, almost like it was gliding. So even if a man could don a suit and act like an 8-foot-tall living creature, how did he manage to walk down a steep embankment that was grassy and wet? Any human would be on his ass or tumble dangerously down that embankment. Anyway, I hurriedly called the wife, who laughed at me for a minute or two, but then realized I was serious. She said, "Get the license plate of the car," which I didn't, and "Where are you?" I was surprised that I hadn't done that at all. Frankly, I think I was just dazed. Well, I know there was somebody else that saw this thing, but that is about all. I would estimate this thing weighed about 400 to 500 pounds. It wasn't fat or barrel-chested. It wasn't skinny either, like it didn't have enough to eat. It was healthy and athletic in appearance, and it sure covered a very difficult area in no time. And by the way, this interstate highway cuts through Eglin U.S. Air Force Base. I am submitting this true report for my cousin, who I am very close to and keep in touch with regularly, that lives outside of Gainesville, Florida. She has told me this amazing story several times before, and she is a very trustworthy person. I strongly felt that this amazing encounter of hers should be reported, and she agreed. As she told me, it was a very clear morning. My cousin was driving her and her younger son to town on a narrow stretch of road near Gainesville, Florida, early one morning around 7 a.m. She may have been taking her son to school, but I can't remember. The narrow road she was on had swamps on both sides of it and looked rather messy. As she was driving along, all of a sudden, a hairy upright creature walked right up out of the swamp on one of the sides of the road and continued walking out in front of her car. And then it just stopped. She immediately stopped the car just a few feet away from this thing, not wanting to hit it, and just stared in shock at what she and her son were seeing. The man-like creature had stopped in the middle of the road and was turned around, looking directly at them, and they got a very good look at the whole body of the creature. The creature walked upright, like a human, with a gait, and looked like a caveman, is the way she put it to me. The creature had hair all over its body, except for around the eyes, nose, and mouth of its face. The most astonishing feature that she noticed was that the creature was wearing some kind of animal skin for protection or something. She was in shock. This creature had to be intelligent to create and wear its own handmade animal skin. The creature showed no aggressive behavior, and after a couple of minutes or so, just casually walked back into the swamp on the other side of the road. The thing looked half human, half ape. The creature was about 8 feet tall as well. When she got home, she told her husband what had happened, and at first he did not believe her. I was a boy of about 12 years of age, camping on my parents' land. We had a house atop a hill that sloped down an acre or two, leading to Bear Creek, which is where our property ended. The land on both of the banks of creek was thickly wooded, and our land was not cleared all the way to the water. 3 of my friends and I had built a fire and unrolled our sleeping bags about 100 or so yards away from the house in the direction of the creek. One of the younger boys was not permitted to stay all night, and as he left to go home, 2 of us were shining our flashlights at him, teasing him about a boogeyman getting him. He was probably about 20 yards or less away from our little campsite, walking through the tall 3 feet grass. In the dim light of the flashlights at the distance, I saw a few yards behind him and walking in the opposite direction, a form that looked like a large biped. My best estimate would make it 6.5 feet or taller. What I saw from halfway between the elbow and shoulder to about halfway between the knee and ankle, so my height estimate is quite rough. It took about 3 strides before it went from one side of the light to the other. The strides were long and smooth and not at all jerky, and it looked like the knees remained bent, as if it was not standing straight upright, but slouching somewhat, and the arms, they swung low. Under the poor lighting conditions, I could not tell what color it was. It looked gray in the shadowy lighting, and it looked furry or hairy. Had I thought of it, I would have tried to follow the form with my flashlight, but the first thing I did was look at the boy sitting on the ground next to me, who was also holding a flashlight, and he was already looking at me, very wide-eyed. He'd asked, "Did you see that?" And I stood up and called for the departing boy to come back. He returned, and when we had told him what we had seen, neither he nor the other boy there believed us. He went home, and the 2 of us who had seen it, not venturing far from the fire, looked around with our flashlights, but we didn't see anything unusual. Neither of us would admit we were afraid, so we stayed all night, but didn't sleep much. The next day I looked for footprints or disturbed soil or grass, and found nothing. My fiancé had an accident at work last summer, where he received burns on his hand, and I had to take him into the burn center in Gainesville at Shands. I was driving home with him in the car, and he was asleep from the painkillers he was on, due to his burns. I had my high beams on, and was going roughly 45 miles an hour down SR 16, eastbound, near Stark Camp Blanding. A creature ran across the road on all 4s, or heavily crouched over. It did not have a tail, and in the high beams it looked bluish-gray. Its rear end was pushed up high from the ground, about 4 feet or so, but when it got to the other side of the road, it just stood up and ran on 2 legs. I noticed its face was very flat, with no snout or jawline, but with hair all around it. It happened very fast, but I'm sure it wasn't a bear, because I could not see a visible snout, and I'm sure it was not a panther, because there was not a tail. Once it stood up, it looked to be about 6 feet tall. Once it crossed the road, it kept on running into the woods and never slowed down. While it was running on the asphalt, it looked like a lemur, running on all fours. Once it hit the grass, it stood up and continued running bipedally without skipping a beat and made maybe 3 steps until it was in the woods. I turned to my fiancé and asked, "Did you see that?" But he was unconscious. I didn't mention it earlier because I never really thought twice about it. But my fiancé and I were watching TV and it was a Bigfoot documentary. So I asked him if he remembered the event and he said no, but then told me to go ahead and report it anyway. I was driving down the state road at 9 p.m. on September 17, 2011. This road is good for heavy traffic and none at all. At the time, I was the only car on the road going both directions. I was headed south towards State Road 528. The 407 runs adjacent to the Canaveral Marsh, lands full of deer, hogs, birds, and plenty of other native wildlife. At 9:10 or so, I saw what appeared to be a skunk ape cross the road right in front of me. This road fits 1 car in each direction. The skunk ape appeared to be running because it crossed the road in 2 steps very easily. After the second step, it jumped down into the side embankment and into the bushes next to the road. I did get a good look at it since I was driving at a pace to avoid hitting deer that crossed the road very frequently. The animal had long hair all over its body, especially on the arms and shoulders. This is the reason I know it was in a sprint. The hair was flowing like it would if it was blowing in the wind. The color of the hair seemed to be dark, reflecting against my headlights and the moonlight. I really couldn't tell the color though. It had a cone-shaped head, very long arms, and when it jumped down into the embankment, the arms went up in the air as to help keep its balance or not hit anything. I saw the side profile of the face. The face was dark, since again it was at nighttime, and it seemed ape-like. The feet were huge. As it took steps, I noticed how large they were. The all-over body seemed very thick. The animal was very muscular. From the side view I had, you can see just how thick of a body it was. I didn't stop to investigate due to the fact that it was nighttime, and I did not want to have a face-to-face with whatever I saw alone on a dark road. Thinking about the situation as it constantly replayed in my mind, I think it might have been in pursuit of a deer. I constantly see deer on the road at night and into the early morning. This was my first time seeing a skunk ape, but I have heard they were sighted sometimes in the area further south on State Road 520. I feel with the rise in deer population, it might have moved into the area. I'm a fishing guide in Florida for well over 25 years and spend approximately 200 days on the water a year. On a charter last month, I had a Delta pilot and a lawyer on my boat. As we pulled into a remote area on the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, I noticed something bent over and walking up a sandbank approximately 100 yards from us. It was just after a good daylight. I thought bear? Hog? As it walked closer, one of my clients noticed it and said, "What is that?" I was speechless. It walked to and within 40 yards, stood up and faced us for about 15 seconds. It took 3 steps, turned sideways and looked at us over its shoulder for another 10, and then walked into the mangroves. The pilot said that that was a Sasquatch, and it was apparently 7 feet tall, long reddish-brown fur, and was built like a side-by-side fridge, very square. Its face looked more caveman than ape. The wind was in our face, and we were silent in my flat skiff. I think that is why he didn't know we were there, as he was hunting the sand beach for food. We were heading home from work, approximately 11 p.m. There was rain and we came up on what we thought was a person along the side of the road, but as we got closer, what we saw was something that was around 7 feet tall to 7.5 feet tall. Long, dirty, shaggy yellow-looking hair. Could not see the face well because of all the hair. It had a tarp or piece of plastic over it. It was getting ready to cross the highway from a wooded area, and as we passed it, my friend and I started describing what we both had seen, and had chills ran through my body. We were going to turn around and see if we could get the figure out and what it was, but we were too scared to. I have never seen anything like that in my life. It was not a man. It was entirely too tall. For several months after seeing it, I wouldn't drive the US-1 at night. I instead traveled I-95. I was flipping through the channels last week, watching some late-night TV, when I saw a program called Finding Bigfoot. It brought me back to the day my mind about the giant changed for me. I only told my mom what I saw. It really changed my life about the unknown. I was running my airboat on the upper St. Johns River, doing what I like to do best, frog jigging on a Friday night. It wasn't the first time I was out on the river at night. I used to run the north and south parts of the river all the time. I still do, just at night, and I make sure I have a running buddy with me. Anyway, I was coming back up on the Oaks. The Oaks are located right next to Duda's property, just a wee south of Lake Winder. I figured I would pull up in the Oakhead and drink a few cups of joe before I started to gig. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something bolt into the cabbage palms. I figured it to be a hog. I really did not know what it was, and the last thing on my mind was what it could have been. Anyway, I ran up on dry ground, about 15 yards, spun my boat around so it was pointed toward the river, and shut it down. I just poured a cup of joe when I had heard something about 10 yards behind me. It sounded like it was wrestling with the cabbage palm, or maybe rolling around in a bunch of palms. Then out of nowhere, I heard a thump right next to my boat. I looked but did not see anything, and then again I heard it behind my boat. Then something hit my rudders. I turned on my headlamp and saw mud on my rudders, and I then saw a bunch of mud fly over me and hit my bow. I shined my light in the direction of where it was coming from, and I saw his face. I lost all feeling in my body, and I just about passed out, and I lost it. I don't know what to do. I was in total shock. I just about peed my pants, I was so scared. I never in my natural-born life moved so fast to crank my boat and get the hell out of there. I almost sank my boat when I hit the river. I just went north knowing I would be in the lake. I was scared to drive home, so I parked in the middle of the Lake Winder and took a few sips of drink to calm my nerves and to try to talk myself out of what I saw. I stayed there until first light. When I got home, I went and seen my mom and had to tell her what I saw. I told her the story because it scared me so. I am a man and I am tough, but that scared the living hell out of me. I figured I should share my story, just like others are on that show. It was about 11 p.m., and I had stopped in the middle of the road to go to the bathroom. Nova Road is 30 miles long in cattle country. After 20 seconds of being out in my car, my sister said somebody was coming. After she said that, I heard branches breaking to the side of the road where the woods are. I glanced to where the sound was coming from and saw a tall, dark animal running toward my car. The animal had to be 7 to 8 feet tall. After I saw the thing running from the woods on the side of the road, I ran back into my car. I was scared. When I first saw it, the thing was running from the woods towards me and my car, and I'm like, well, we're out of here. It ran like a man, upright. It was 11 p.m., so naturally the color was dark in appearance, but from my taillights, I'd still say it was dark in color, and it moved fairly quickly, which is why I jumped back into my car so quick. As I sped away, I tapped my brake lights and saw the thing standing there in the road looking at us as we drove away from it. It was a really creepy feeling. I still remember it clearly to this day. It was just so eerie. I didn't notice any sound, just when I had heard the first branch break, and then the footsteps increased a lot. And after I heard this, then I turned around and looked towards the side of the road. It could have made a noise, but I went from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, so I didn't notice any other sounds. My sister actually heard the noise of the thing first, and she said something is coming, so I'm like, yeah, right. But then I heard it, and then we saw it. She was so afraid that she couldn't stop laughing. I know, strange, right? But she was actually laughing because I jumped so quickly back into the car. She was still in the car, and she said she didn't know what it was, and neither did I at the time. Back in 1985 to 86, my family had relocated to Coral Springs from Miami before the Sawgrass Expressway was built. We lived so close to the Glades, my friend and I used to ride our skateboards to the levee and watch the Everglades burn. At the time, some firebug had set quite a blaze. On some mornings, we'd wake to cars and yards covered in ash. Needless to say, a lot of wildlife began to migrate closer to our neighborhood. For example, deer, alligators, whatever. One night we pitched a tent in my friend's backyard, approximately 50 yards from a canal that separated us from an apartment complex, and across from that was the beginning of the Everglades. The fires had been raging for weeks, and people in the area were reporting missing pets, some of which were inside 6-foot privacy fences. We used to run between the houses to cut through to go home. This night in particular, before we called it quits, we played a bit of hide and seek. I remember hiding under a window box behind a bush and got spotted by an unmarked police car. We really thought we were in trouble, but the police were looking for a person that had been peeping in windows. We assured the cops we weren't the perps and went on about our business and went to the tent. 3 kids in a tent don't sleep well, so we're having fun cracking jokes and noticed a sound coming from across the canal, approximately 100 yards away. Something was slamming the dumpster lids in the complex across the way and making low, deep sounds, grunts. These were tall dumpsters. You'd have to get a boost to lift the lid. We got real quiet, trying to listen to figure out what it could be. At first, we figured a cow got loose and possibly was bumping into the dumpster, but it became evident that wasn't so. One of the kids I was with turned on a flashlight and started making shadow puppets with his E.T. stuffed animal. Then, the thing from across the canal took notice of us for the first time. The grunts were still audible, but with what I would say was a hint of curiosity. We got quiet and real concerned, putting 2 and 2 together. Could this be what the police were looking for? The steps grew closer and closer. I remember we tried to figure it out as if it was a quadruped or a biped. When the steps had finally stopped, the breathing grew louder. And then splash! Whatever it was, 50 yards from us, coming right in our direction. We sprinted for the house, waking up my friend's family. They were woken by 3 screaming kids at 2 in the morning, exclaiming something is out there. His dad grabbed his shotgun, turned on the floodlights, and he went out to look around and found the tent was demolished and covered in water. I swear I could feel this thing right around the corner in the shadows, looking right at us. We did not let his father investigate further until morning and couldn't believe the tent had been moved from its position. I have no doubt we stayed in that tent. This story would be much different, if at all. I am 35 now and have never forgotten that night. Myself and my brother both had separate encounters with it in the spring and fall of 1994, respectively. I first encountered something in the spring of 1994 when camping with a group of friends in the woods, bordered by Lyons Road to the west, the Florida Turnpike to the east, Sample Road to the south, and Winston Park Development to the north. I left the camp alone at about 1 a.m., heading east towards the turnpike on a trail. I began to hear what seemed to be footsteps in the wood, maybe 10 yards to my right. I'd also like to say that I smelt a musty odor, but I could be inserting that into the report. It's been a while since I had the encounter, and my recollection isn't as clear as I wish it were. Regardless, I continued to walk, and the footsteps were remaining parallel with mine. It became clear that whatever was to my right was walking on 2 feet from the stepping pattern. I started to get a little frightened because the area where the footsteps were coming from was a thicket of Brazilian peppers. difficult to walk through during the day, and nearly impossible to manage in the night. I heard it move closer, and I turned around and walked briskly back to the camp. I woke my friends and we went back to find it, although it was gone at the time. I remember leaving with the impression that I had encountered a Sasquatch, which must be because of the musty scent, although I wrote it off as a figment of my imagination, that it must have been a farmer or vagrant in the woods. I proceeded to forget about the incident and never mentioned it again. About 6 months later, my brother was in the same woods, maybe a half-mile from where I had my encounter, walking at night with a friend. He turned a corner from one trail to another, and Bigfoot was standing at the intersection of the two trails. He said that it had reached out for him, and he and his friend had ran off. He told me about the experience, and I then related mine. We had a running joke for a while that there was a monster in our backyard. I'd like to be able to have my brother provide his, since he had a sighting and is better and more credible than I am, but he passed away at the end of 1995. I believe I might be able to find the friend, however. Regardless, I wanted to report the incident for a few reasons. First, it's very unusual to encounter a creature like this in the area. That area is surrounded on all sides by a significant amount of development. While there remained a good deal of open land, including a tomato farm, a tree farm, Tradewinds Park, and some undeveloped land, it didn't strike me as being an area where one would have to thought to find a creature like this. There doesn't seem to be too terribly far for this thing to go without it being spotted. Further, given the amount of development that has gone into the area since, its range is becoming severely limited. Still, the 1975 Broward report happened about a mile or two west of where my brother and I saw it, so it must have found a way to adapt. It's possible it can move along the turnpike and the Sawgrass Expressway somewhat unnoticed, making it over the nearby landfill, as well as Quiet Waters Park, although it appears unlikely that it could have gone too much further without it being caught in the middle of suburbia. Given the amount of development that has since gone into the area, its range is further being restricted. It might be a very lucrative area to investigate. At the rate development is going, if it is still back there, it's going to be encroached upon sometime very soon.